In the last step, we saw that it was very, very easy to create Spring Boot projects. In this step, to understand the power of Spring Boot, we'll see how you can build a simple REST API. Let's go over to our IDE. What I would want to do in here is to create a simple REST API. So I'll create a new class. You can say file new or right click new in here. Choose class. And I would want to create something called course controller. And I'll say finish. What do we want to do inside the course controller? What we want to do is to create a API like this. So I'll pick up the URL in here and the data we would want to return back in here. So what we want to do is to create a simple REST API with the URL /courses. And when somebody hits that URL, what we want to do is to return this data back. So we would want to return course details with ID, name, and author. This is what we would want to return back from our course controller. What do you want to do in the course controller? We would want to build a REST API. That's why I would use the annotation REST controller. That's why I would use the annotation REST controller. So if you do an organize imports, you should see org Spring Framework web bind annotation REST controller imported in. Now that we have the @REST controller annotation on this, you can create methods in here and expose the link that we would want to create. So this is what we want to do in here. So we would want to retrieve a set of courses and return them back. So a set of courses. So let's create public list of course. So we'll be returning a list of courses and I'll call this retrieve all courses. And this method will not have any parameters, and let's create the body of the method. What we want to do in here is to return a list of courses. So return arrays.asList. Arrays.asList is a method in arrays class, java.util.arrays. So I'll remove the null and I'll put a semicolon at the end. Inside this, I'd want to create our new courses. So I'll say new course of, let's say ID is 1. The name is learn AWS. And let's say the author is in 28 minutes. And we would want to create another bean, learn, let's say DevOps. And the course ID, let's say this is 2. And let's say the author is in 28 minutes. Now, you should see a set of compilation errors in here because we don't have the course class. We have not imported the list in here. So the first thing I'll do is organize imports. So if you do a Control-Shift-O or Command-Shift-O, you should see an import for Java util list. So that's good. One compilation error fix. The next one is that the course class does not exist. How can we fix this? The way we can fix this is by pressing Control-1 or Command-1 in here. So what we want to do in here is to create a class called course. So let's go ahead and say create class course. I'll take the defaults and say finish. And over here, we would want to define all the attributes that we would want to have. So let's say I would want to have a ID, private long ID, private string name, and private string author. These are the fields I would want to store for the course. As usual, let's go ahead and create a few methods in here. We would want to create a constructor. We would want to create getters for this, getter methods, and we'll also want to create a toString method. The toString, so let's go ahead and generate them. The way you can do that is by saying right click source and generate toString. So let's start with toString. So I'll generate the toString method in here. So the toString method is now here. So let's move this above. So we generated the toString now. The next thing that we want to generate is the getters. So right click source, generate getters and setters. And I only want getters. So I'll say select getters and say generate. So we have the getters generated, get ID, get name, get author. The toString method is generated and it's at the top. So I'll move that to the bottom. So typically toString method should be present at the end. Whenever we print an object of the course class, the toString method is called and all the details of the course would be printed. And these getter methods would be helping us to retrieve the values of a course whenever we need them. The last thing we would need is the constructor. So let's generate the constructor also. Right click source, generate constructor using fields. And I would want to choose all the things in here, ID, name, author. And I would want to insert it after the author field. So let's go ahead and generate. So we now have the constructor also in here. So you have a constructor accepting ID, name, and author. If you see this is exactly matching what we have in here. One, learn AWS in 28 minutes. ID, name, and the author. And now when you save all the files, you'd see that the code would compile. So that's awesome. We now have compiling code. What we want to do is to map a URL to this specific method. What's the URL I would want to map? /courses. When somebody hits /courses, I would want to return this list of courses back. How can I do that? At request mapping. And over here, I can map the URL /courses. If you do an organize imports, you'd see that org Spring Framework web bind annotation request mapping is imported in. So now I can remove all the comments in here, Control D or Command D, and save this out here. So what we have in here is a simple course controller from where we are exposing /courses. So we would want to be able to use this URL. And when we go to this URL, we should see a list of courses come back. Let's go ahead and stop and start the application up. You can go in here and start Learn Spring Boot application, or the other approach would be to go in here, Learn Spring Boot application, and right click Run as Java application. Either of these approaches should be fine. One thing you need to remember is you need to stop the application before you can start it up. So I've stopped and started the application, and let's go to the browser and type in the URL localhost 8080/courses. Awesome. You can see that a JSON response is coming back. If you see an unformatted response, I would recommend you to install this extension. So JSON formatter, Chrome extension. This would take you to an extension called JSON formatter. I've installed this specific extension, and that's the reason why you would see that this JSON is formatted. If you look at the raw, it would be something like this. However, if I'm using the JSON formatter plugin and formatting it, this is how it would look. So we have a couple of courses which are returned back. Learn AWS in 28 minutes. Learn DevOps within 28 minutes. As you can see in here, creating REST API with Spring Boot is very, very easy. We did not need to focus on anything else. All that we needed to focus on was the business logic. What do we want to do? We did not need to configure any Spring Beans or any XML at all. How is Spring Boot making this possible? That's what we'll be exploring starting the next step. In the last couple of steps, we saw that it was very, very easy to create a Spring Boot project and expose a simple REST API. You saw that it was very, very easy to do this with Spring Boot. However, there is a lot that is happening in the background with Spring Boot. When you want to make the best use of Spring Boot, you need to understand what's happening in the background of Spring Boot. And that's what we will be doing starting the next step.